Art, if I were defining it to a snotty English teacher, is any creative activity used either to inform, persuade, or entertain an audience, or to serve some practical purpose like creating food or shelter. And believe me, art's been around for a pretty long time. A shocking revelation, I'm aware, but stay with me here.
Was that the
For as long as our half-monkey ancestors were able to smear mammoth blood on the walls of their cave dwellings, we as humans have used art for a buttload of things. From telling stories, to sharing opinions, to making day-to-day life easier, to making fun of stupid people. Art is something that has impacted people's lives since we were first figuring out how mating worked. And like mating, if something stays in the public consciousness for long enough, it's bound to grow and expand past its fundamental parts. Like a penis, animation is an art form using two or more drawings that, when played in sequence, create the illusion of movement, otherwise known as the thing that you're watching right now. And believe me, it's been around for a while. Another shocking revelation, I'm aware, I'm sure.
My whole world is turned upside down. That doesn't make any sense.
But in actuality, it's probably been around longer than you think. Around 1977, Italian archaeologists, try saying that 10 times fast, discovered an ancient bowl in, oh my god, I'm gonna butcher this so bad, Shrari Sukte, Iran. That dates back to about 3000 BC. Now, if this were like most ancient bowls, it wouldn't be worth mentioning for this video, since they wouldn't have cool animations on them. At least, I don't think they do. However, this bowl was cool and awesome for one particular reason. The bowl is designed with a series of goat paintings that, when the bowl is spun, makes it look like a silly little gooner guy is jumping across the surface of your bowl. Whoa! It's like the goat is moving, but it's not actually moving because it's a picture. It's almost like an illusion that makes this goat look like it's moving. Oh my god! It's like this goat is animated.
No.
You know, people give Disney a lot of credit for being the father of modern animation. But do you see Walter alias Disney putting his silly mouse cartoons on ancient Iranian bowls? Do you see him making steamboat wheeling on ancient Iranian bowls in 3000 BC? Sure, I was sucked at Iran. Didn't think so. Did not think so. SMH. But, okay, I guess tableware isn't most people's first thought when discussing animation. In fact, for the sake of this video, let's give a specific definition to the word animation. Animation in this video specifically refers to any filmographic media in which 2D animation techniques are primarily used. As long as it's recorded and viewable by the general public, it counts. And by drawings, I mean anything that is drawn on paper, cell, or some other kind of canvas. We will also only be referring to 2D animation today, and digital animation will not in any way apply to the discussion of this video. 3D animation and digital animation are richly interesting in their own right, but they won't be discussed in this video. With that in mind, I guess it's fair to say that Disney is the face of modern animation, since a lot of people probably associate animation with at least one of their movies. Whether it be Snow White, oh come on man. Whether it be Snow White, or Pinocchio, or Lion King, Cinderella, Aladdin, or another of Disney's greats. Disney has a multitude of classics under their belt that any uncultured swine could at least recognize. And overall, Disney's definitely one of the biggest competitors in the animation industry right now, and has been for several decades. However, saying that Walt Disney himself is the father of animation ignores so much history and so much talent. that came long before the House of Mouse. And in this amazing Keel Jenkins video, I want to highlight some of that history and talent. But before we do that, a word from me in real life. In real life! Oh, sorry, hang on. This isn't a sponsored segment, by the way. I'm not a big enough channel to get sponsors. Hint, hint, wink, wink, please subscribe. Instead, I figured that if we're talking about the animation of old, we might as well think like the animators of old. Really put ourselves in those shoes. Really put ourselves in these shoes right here. These ones. These smelly ones, you see them? Yeah, we're gonna go in those. And of course, in order to do that, we have to make animation like the animators of old. Using paper and pencil. Pretty cool, right? No, not really. On paper, the materials are pretty simple to list. We'll use a pencil and a whole buttload of paper. That's it. The specific amount of paper we'll need depends on how many frames we want to make. For example, I'm drawing this animation at 12 FPS, and I plan on making about 5 seconds of animation. I multiply the frame rate by the amount of seconds to get 60 frames. So we'll need 60 sheets of paper, one for each frame. That's only the baseline though, because I would recommend extra paper for sketching, planning, or making major mistakes. I also kept an extra couple of pencils on hand, along with our handy dandy pencil sharpener to keep the pencils sharp, which evidently is what a pencil sharpener is intended to do. And because I have this at my disposal, I think we should use a light board as a surface. It's not a necessity per se, but it does make life much easier. It's a flat surface, unlike my desk apparently, and it makes keeping proportions accurate between frames easier. And from personal experience, it makes you feel super duper cool, which is always necessary. So, now that we have our materials, we need something to animate. And I have just the thing in mind. In this drawing book called Draw, Doodle, Design, I drew this silly little story that we'll dub the story of Tim. The story is about this scrinkly dinkly named Tim, who encounters this cliche bully character named Brad, and tries to escape him only to be captured by a tree that's alive and forcefully grabs him at one point. Somehow. In particular, we're going to animate this part where Tim gets snatched by the tree. It looks simple enough, and it seems like it would be pretty cool animated. So that's why we're gonna animate it. But Keyhole, James Jenkins, these characters are simple and all, but maybe they're too simple. As is, Tim looks super duper boring, like a snooze fest. You know what? Fine, true. Let's redesign him a little. Instead of the stick figure aesthetic, let's go for a more noodly rectangular look. Let's make him super duper tall, with a thin, wobbly body, one that would easily flail around by the slightest gust of wind. To highlight this even more, let's make his head super big, and make his limbs long and noodly too. There we go, great. Now this character shows them personality. Now let's workshop the tree a bit. We don't need to worry that much about 90% of its design, but we do need to worry about the arms. And to be fair, those are connected to the rest of the body, so we want to make sure everything looks aesthetically comparable. Alright, characters are done. Next, we should plan out how our animation is going to look. This means making a storyboard and planning the timing for each action in the animation. As defined by Wikipedia, a storyboard is a graphic organizer that consists of illustrations or images displayed in sequence for the purpose of pre-visualizing a motion picture, animation, motion graphic, or interactive media sequence. In simpler terms, it's the rough sketch showing how the animation is going to look step by step. Think of it like a blueprint, but for animation. As for the timing, this will tell us how many in-betweens to draw for each action, making drawing and spacing out these in-betweens easier during the animation process. And speaking of the animation process, I think we're just about ready to start. Okay, I think we get the idea. How about we come back to this later? Yeah, let's go over this history stuff, and then we can check back later when this is done. Great, great, moving on. As said previously, animation technically dates all the way back to 3000 BC. However, tableware is mid, and doesn't match our established definition of animation. So, based on our definition, what is the first piece of animation media? Well, I'm glad you asked. Or rather, I'm glad I asked, since I'm the one who asked the question. Or maybe we both asked the question because the viewer very well could have asked that exact same question. And anyway, the first recorded animation comes from this man. This man, right here. See him? This is
Charles-Émile Rhino.
And he is the real father of animation. Not Walter, the mustache-twiddling Mr. Monopoly lookalike. This guy
Charles-Émile Rhino.
was born in
Montreuil-sous-Bois.
on December 8th, 1844. He was a French inventor who would learn engineering from his father.
Claude Brutu-Rhino.
During his childhood, he would become an apprentice in repairs and assembly. In 1858, would work in photography from 1862 to 1865, and would use personally made magic lanterns for his science lectures in the 1870s. For those unaware, which trust me, I get it, I was unaware of this either, the magic lantern was basically one of those school projectors your teacher would use, but like really, really old. Like 1603 old. Yeah. In terms of
Charles-Émile Rhino.
own inventions, he would create an improved version of 1834's zoetrope called the
Praxinoscope.
in 1876. The
Praxinoscope.
would use pictures placed inside a spinning cylinder that, when viewed through a circle of mirrors, would appear to be animated. From there,
Charles-Émile Rhino.
would continue to refine this invention over the next few years, with a toy version called the
Praxinoscope jouet.
in 1877, the
Praxinoscope théâtre.
in 1879, and the
Projecting praxinoscope.
in 1880. In 1888, he would go on to create the
Théâtre optique.
a very important invention, for reasons we'll get into shortly. The
Théâtre optique.
was a further advancement of the praxinoscope, being a moving picture system able to project movies over 10 minutes in length. I don't want to explain all the technology behind this, so let's just get to the point. In 1892, using the
Théâtre optique.
the first 3 animated films to be shown were shown. These films were made by
Charles-Émile Rhino.
himself and were called,
Un bon boc, Le clown et ses chiens, en Pauvre Pierrot.
respectively. However,
Un bon boc en Le clown et ses chiens.
are mostly lost to time, having no recorded footage available online. The reason for this is actually pretty sad too, with
Charles-Émile Rhino.
suffering from depression in 1910 and throwing most of his work into the
Seine.
river, which makes a lot of his work considered lost media. However,
Pauvre Pierrot.
created in 1891 and shown in 1892, is partially preserved and available on YouTube. So to answer the question of what is the first piece of animation media, this is it.
Pauvre Pierrot.
Was originally a 15-minute film that remains partially lost to this day. However, there have been around 5 minutes of it recorded and preserved, so I'd say this counts. It is the first one recorded and viewable by the general public, after all. The film stars this cheeky little fellow behind the wall. His name is Harlequin, and the story revolves around him trying to get with this woman named Columbina. Throughout the story, he supposedly has a rivalry with this other person, the titular Perrault. The section of the film that's been preserved ends with Harlequin entering Columbina's house, ready to have wild intercourse with his French croissant. Sadly, though, the other 10 minutes are still lost to time, so we couldn't see our protagonist get that Columbussy. Sad times, I know. Sad times. Before we talk about visuals, I want to be real for a sec and state that this really confused me upon further research. Like, the research brought up more questions than answers. It was like anti-research. First of all, why is this guy named Perrault? You would think that, considering the title, Perrault would be someone to feel bad for, like an underdog story, where he gets dealt a bad hand in whatever shenanigans he's in and has to rise above the odds. And if we're supposed to root for this Perrault character, you would expect them to be the protagonist, someone who we follow throughout the whole story, like a certain cheeky fellow behind a wall whose name isn't Perrault, but Harlequin. But at the same time, even if he was Perrault, that wouldn't make much sense either, because we don't see him being the underdog. Like, yeah, Harlequin seems to be in competition with Perrault, but he never seems to be at a particular disadvantage. In fact, he seems to scare Perrault off rather easily. And we don't even get any dialogue or exposition to clue us in on what's going on. All this to say, I honestly wish we had the whole film, because I feel like it would explain this to some degree. Or maybe not, who knows. But it would still be cool to see, right? At least. So, the story, while being simple enough on paper, kind of loses me in some aspects. Cool. But what we're mostly concerned about is the visuals, the animation, the revolutionary milestone this represents for the animation medium. And honestly, it's pretty good for 1892, I'll give it that. The characters' actions have some flow to them, albeit with some choppiness sprinkled throughout. On top of that, the characters actually give off some kind of personality with how they act. They don't tell you who they are, or who the heck to feel bad for, but you at least have a clue about their personality. For example, Harlequin seems sneaky and sly, but also bold and willing to mess with the people who cross his path. Columbia seems like an average 1890s portrayal of a woman. Yeah, real deep, I know. And Perrault seems like a loser. The animation does loop at some points, but not as much as what some animated films do later down the road. And it doesn't really detract from the film in this case, since they don't do it a lot. They don't even really hold on still frames for long, which I was pleasantly surprised by considering what's to come. The film also uses a lot of choreography throughout. Now, having sound played alongside the film was common for the silent era, with music being played live in the theaters while the films were playing. But seeing it implemented here, especially with the technology at the time, is honestly just really cool to me. Overall, this most likely isn't something I'd watch again, but it's pretty good for what it is.
Charles-Émile Rino.
Clearly had a solid grasp on making animation, and was able to make something significantly better than what's to come for over a decade. It honestly just sucks that we don't have a lot of his work to look back on. In fact, the only other animated work from him that I could find is a film called
Autour d'une cabine.
released in 1894. And even then, there's only 1 minute and 50 seconds of footage from the original left preserved out of the 10 that were made. And since this film is brief, I'll try to keep my review brief. The big issue I have with this is that I can barely see the characters. Something I didn't mention about
Pauvre Pierrot.
is that all of the characters are painted mostly purely white. This was possibly because the sheets used to draw the characters were black, requiring
Charles-Émile Rino.
to paint on them with white. I'm not the one who made these films or used the,
Théâtre optique.
but that's what I'm assuming. But unlike in
Pauvre Pierrot.
where the white stood out against the dark night background, the use of pure white here just makes the characters blend in with the background, especially with the sky and the sand. Add on the low quality of the recording, and you've got a recipe for a what in the heck is going on.
Faire la fête.
The story's also barely existent, and the film just isn't entertaining. It's not even as technically impressive since
Pauvre Pierrot.
did this exact same thing way better 2 whole years ago. I would not recommend watching this. It's not good. Back to you, real life Keel Jenkins. How's it going?
Frames 8 and 9. Also, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Great, awesome. Moving on. Hey guys, I'm really happy right now. You want to know why? Because I don't have to meticulously edit text-to-speech French into my voice recordings. And you want to know why I don't have to do that? Because now we're gonna talk about the rise of diabetes. America. We're talking about America. More specifically, enter J. Stuart Blackton. Born in 1875, he was a British-American filmmaker during the silent era. He's credited as one of the first filmmakers to use the techniques of stop motion and drawn animation. And as far as my research took me, he is responsible for America's first animated films. He's also made a lot of live-action films, but those aren't related to the topic at hand, and therefore they are mid. Instead, I want to talk about his animated films. The first two being the Enchanted Drawing and Humorous Phases of Funny Faces. The Enchanted Drawing, released in 1900, is a short film in which holy macaroni! Okay, this is off topic, sorry, but look at this. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look. This was released on November 16th, 1900. And guess what? My birthday is November 16th. I share a birthday with the first ever American animated film. Oh my god. That is so cool. That's so cool. I'm so excited about it. Anyway, the Enchanted Drawing features an actor interacting with this drawn head, only running for 1.5 minutes and taking place solely in front of this canvas. The film uses a mix of live action and stop motion animation. In particular, it likes to do this thing, where the actor draws something on the canvas, appears to pull that thing into the real world, and then gives it to the drawing, which garners an animated reaction from the animated character. The animated reactions themselves only consist of keyframes, meaning that they'll just switch from one pose to another in the course of one frame. Usually, especially as we will see later, there are frames in between the keyframes called in-betweens that make movements smooth, but here they are completely absent. I would assume that's because of the technique used to make the animation. The technique used to make this animation involved stopping the camera, changing the pose, and starting the camera again for each new frame. This way, it appears that the drawing is reacting while the actor is moving on screen. To make different expressions, I can only assume that the camera was stopped, the expression was switched, and the camera was started again with the actor in the exact same spot as before. And they might have found it too time-consuming or difficult to do in-betweens on top of keyframes, which is understandable, considering how new animated films were at the time. Filmmakers were probably still fairly new to the medium, and might have wanted to set some groundwork before making animation more complicated. And as is, as the kids would say, pretty rad. as is. Not only is it the first American animated film, but it's also the first animated film that I know of to mix live action with the animation, something that later successes like Space Jam and Space Jam 2 and probably Space Jam 3 in the future would show off in their movies. And for that, the enchanted drawing is a certified cool moment. Just like Blackton's second animated film. Humorous Phases of Funny Faces, released in 1906, refines the animation quality of the enchanted drawing by showing a lot more actual movement as opposed to just switching poses. The film also relies much less on live action, with only brief appearances of an actor to draw or erase characters. This allows for the animation to take center stage, being done with stop motion and stick puppetry techniques, and looking much more lively than what was in the enchanted drawing. The characters' movements are smooth, the expressions are more entertaining, and what's presented was able to keep me engaged upon first viewing. Like the enchanted drawing, however, there's not much of a story. The characters just kind of do stuff and look like silly little goobers, I guess. Overall, the animation here is a major improvement, and honestly, I would recommend watching it. And to top off our section on Gay Stewart, I want to briefly mention his other animated films. Most of them don't technically count for the purposes of this video anyway. The Haunted Hotel in 1907 is mostly just live action. There is some stop motion thrown in there to make objects move, but that's really it. Lightning Sketches from 1908 is just the enchanted drawing, but racist and done slightly better. 1908's Romeo and Juliet was the first film adaptation of, you guessed it, Antony and Cleopatra. But it's lost to time, so that sucks. And I don't know why the thieving hand was listed because there's no animation in it, but it exists. It's there. And that's it. He never made any other animated films after this. He supposedly thought they were rather juvenile and left them all out of his unpublished autobiography. Overall, I'd say J. Stuart Blackton helped lay the groundwork for animated films to come, along with
Charles-Émile Rinaud.
he might not have had much long-term interest in animation, but his stop-motion work made for the first animated films of American history. And for that, as an American, I can respect Blackton's career as a filmmaker. I probably won't watch his films ever again under any circumstance, but I can respect them. Except maybe for the parts where he's racist. But I think it's time to move on to some other films. These will be more rapid fire, almost like a clip show with some side notes, because all I really want to highlight is how animation evolved during this time. How, between the late 1900s and 1937, animation was becoming more of a presence in the film industry. How techniques were changing, and how animation quality was rising. And I think you get what happens from there. Disney would continue to make cartoons, and would also branch out into making full-length movies in 1937 with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. From there, they would continue to rise in fame, becoming the acclaimed corporation they are today. You know, the one that owns every single property in existence? Yeah, that one. Disney's works have also inspired many other animation studios, like Pixar, DreamWorks, and The Dead One, who would make their own animated films, some of which becoming classics in the industry, with 3D, CGI, claymation, among others, being popularized and used in some truly great films. Not every animated film is good, sure. There are a lot of not good animated films, but don't get it twisted. Animation is a great medium. It's capable of producing some truly amazing stuff, capable of taking a viewer on magical journeys that could never be properly illustrated otherwise, and very well capable of provoking deep emotion when it wants to. Animation is a hard medium to master. Heck, I've been doing it for years, and my animation is far, 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 far away from perfect. But animation, no matter what techniques are used, no matter what it's illustrating, is a medium that has an immeasurable amount of beauty to offer to anyone who will care to look for it. Anyone like us!
That's all, folks.
Hello. You may have noticed that this video is still continuing, even though I seemingly just ended off on a pretty conclusive note. Well, let me share with you 3 pieces of information. 1. You're wrong. 2. I finished the animation. Psst, Keel. That was only 2 pieces of information. What? What? You say in the script that there are 3 pieces of information. You still have to list the 3rd one. Oh, right. Thanks, Cloud. I'll see you in the interview segment. And 3, we're gonna talk about it in the style of an there we go. Yep, you got it. Right there. Great. Perfect. Yes. I would agree. Great. Perfect. Hello, Keel Jenkins. It is to my understanding that you made your first traditional animation recently. Would you like to run us through your process? Why know how you did this? Well, I did explain this earlier in the video, but basically I just took an idea from a story I made a couple years ago, and I ran with that. I planned out the animation with a storyboard, got a rough estimate on the timing of each action, and I made sure I had all the paper and the pencils that I would need. After that, I got to work, drawing each frame one at a time. I would then photograph each frame and import them into ToonSquid, where they were then combined into the final animation. And what was animating this way like for you? Well, it was a long process. Even making 3 frames could take up to an hour. It was also pretty monotonous, which only got more and more noticeable and more hindering as more frames were completed. Yes, drawing the frames in and of itself got monotonous, but so did doing that every single weekday, practically making a schedule out of it. On top of that, I found myself missing some of the luxuries of digital animation software, like the undo button, erasing that doesn't leave behind remnants of lines. However, it was ultimately rewarding to gradually put more and more frames together and slowly see my vision come to life. So I'd say it was worth it in the end, if only for the experience and the previously mentioned reward of seeing your vision come to life. Hmm. So I guess you had some struggles with this. Is there anything you would do differently if you were to do it again? Well, first of all, the monotony honestly made the animation frames like worse over time, and I feel like the second time around I would try to like remedy that somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, but like I would try something. I would have also tried to figure out a better sitting position to keep my posture in check. Perhaps I would have the light board at an angle propped up on something or something. My chair also can't go all the way under my desk, so I can't really sit that close to the desk, which doesn't really help matters. I think I did everything else pretty decently though. Obviously, I'm far from perfection, like there's a lot I could have done better like in general. But other than those two things, I don't think I did anything like glaringly wrong per se. Well, from your account, it seems like this was a good learning experience. Would you say that you learned something from this experience? Most of what I learned was stuff that I already had an idea of, but gained more weight by experiencing it firsthand. For example, traditional animation is hard. I mean, every form of animation is hard, but like traditional animation techniques, especially digital 2D, has at least like the undo button and like other technical capabilities. And you don't literally have to redraw every single frame with copy and paste and keyframing and rigging and whatnot. Really makes you just that much more grateful for the technology of today. Something else that definitely went through my head is how much more monotonous and grueling animation can be when you're working on a schedule, especially with a deadline in mind. You get so caught up in the monotony of the whole thing that it actually takes a toll on the animation quality, and you have to snap yourself out of that somehow. And that's only for a few seconds of animation. Can you imagine making a whole movie like that? Or even just a 1 minute scene? It's crazy how much tenacity these animators had. Jeez. Very interesting. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Jenkins. No, no, I think I'm starting to like Mr. Jenkins. Okay. Are you gonna like change your YouTube moniker to that or something? I mean, it could be like interchangeable, where it can be either depending on the situation or whenever I feel like it. Oh, right. I'm glad I could help you figure out a new YouTube moniker. Okay, sorry to cut you off, but I really have to end this before it drags on too long. Yeah, no,